There's two main reasons a coach should speak in a coaching session after just initial dialogue might happen. Two main reasons. Number one, to ask a meaningful, powerful question. Number two, to offer a bit of direct communication. Direct communication, competency number 7 from the International Coach Federation, is very important, but it doesn't necessarily grab the attention as much as the other competencies. And it also, it has 3 main parts. And so we'll unpack those in this video. And as we unpack them, there's going to be some exceptions. It's going to sound like waffling back and forth on some things, but the idea of direct communication, it's the general rules of thumb in helping a coaching session be clear, concise, and for the client's sake. There's also some interplay between competency 7 and the other competencies, so you'll probably hear some overlapping language with this competency. So let's take a look at some of the markers of success for competency 7, direct communication. The first couple are paired together in terms of the observations, comments, thoughts, feelings, maybe sometimes suggestions that the coach offers. Now, these are going to be the coach's inputs that are beyond questions. When a coach shares an observation, hey, I noticed this is something you said. Hey, when you were answering that question, you were rubbing your neck. I noticed your tone went up or down. This is something that you had said earlier in a session. I just wanted to highlight, there might be a parallel here. What do you see? With all of these are observations, something that the coach is noticing and the coach says something about it. It's an input. It's not necessarily a question, though observations should be followed up with some sort of question. Comments, thoughts, feelings, these are the ICF's way of saying whatever the coach wants to say in the moment. With all of these things, even sometimes suggestions, there's 2 rules with them. Marker number 1 is that these things are all meant for the client's direction, success, growth, and development, especially in terms of their own growth of their own sense of volition and inner strength. If a coach, for instance, if a coach steps into an advising mode and they're stepping away from the coaching mode, then they are going to keep offering advice, suggestions, my idea of what might work in your situation, client. The more a coach does that, the more the client's brain is going to shut off and allow the coach to give advice, and half of that or less is going to be actually heard and digested by the person, and it doesn't stick because the person hasn't done the effort. They haven't put in the work to create that suggestion, to create that advice or possible solution. So the ICF's marker number 1 is, this has got to be for their sake. And not only this is well-meaning advice, I think it might work for them. That's not for their sake, because if we are taking away their ability to make their own decision in how we phrase even something like a suggestion, then we are taking away from the coaching relationship. We want to be mindful of that. Now, the second part is very similar. With all of these things, observations, comments, thoughts, feelings, and possibly suggestions, they have to be offered in a way that is open-handed. There's no attachment to this is the only way we could go. This is the only interpretation of what was going on in the session as you were sharing your thoughts here, answering my question. I'm not attached to what they think of my observation, what they think of my feeling that I may share in the session. I'm only offering it as another data point. For instance, if an individual were to say that they're answering a question, but as you notice them answering the question, you see that they're fidgeting, and you might interpret that as, oh, that might be fear. So your observation is, hey, I noticed you were kind of twitching a little bit as you're answering the question there, and I just got the sense that you might be afraid of what you were saying, or there might be some fear there. That would be called an interpretive observation. And if we ask that, then we need to really hand them back the session by saying, but what did you see? What are you feeling? What are you sensing? And that communicates that it's okay. I don't have to be right here, client. This is just an observation of what was happening. A coach really falls into a trap and it kind of creates a session trap with the client when the coach offers some sort of interpretation, observation, especially a piece of advice that the coach knows is the right option. It is the right interpretation. It is the right perspective, because it all of a sudden creates this situation where the client has to validate the coach's idea, or the coaching relationship breaks. The coaching conversation hits a low point and a hesitation, and it becomes a psychologically unsafe environment for creative thought and problem solving. Whew, that's a lot on that's a lot of long-winded conversation on direct communication with just the first two markers. But whatever we say to the client needs to be for their sake, and it needs to be open-handed. We aren't attached. Now, we'll talk more about, some more details with those two markers, especially going forward. But let's move to markers 3 and 4. These are short and to the point. Use the client's language. We've seen this in active listening. We see this in other areas of the markers. It's a common part of what it means to coach someone. Use their language. And concise. The shorter the question, the better, usually. The less verbal processing from the coach, the better. The more time that is taken to think about the question in the silence and the pause, coming in then with a clear question, not asking a second or a clarifying question, all of that creates a clean space for exploration and more time for the other person. And that leads to markers 5 and 6. The client talks most of the time, and my general rule of thumb is 80-20. It's a nice way of measuring success. Generally, the client needs to talk 80% of the time, whereas the coach would talk about 20. And as the coach grows, that's going to go around 90-10. 90% the client speaking, 10% the coach speaking. And this is because the coach is primarily asking clear, crisp questions, and when offering observations, they're quick and to the point, very efficient. Oftentimes the biggest area of development and the biggest indicator of success between an ACC coach, associate, and an MCC coach, master, is not the depth necessarily where they go, but particularly the efficiency. Whereas in 2 hours of coaching, a person can go really far, maybe with a ACC, PCC coach. An MCC coach may be able to get there with quite a bit less time, maybe 20 minutes, 40 minutes, because they're concise. They pare down what they say just to the core, and they're really comfortable with the silence to get there. And finally, number 6, no interruptions. No interruptions unless there's a very valid coach-specific reason for doing so. Now, there's going to be another video on that, when to interrupt a client. Probably a few videos that we want to make sure to use throughout the training so that we know what that feels like, what that sounds like. If a coach is interrupting a client, it should not be the case where the coach just felt like they had to say something. That intention or that intuition or that urge needs to be held back. Coach-specific reasons would be when the coach needs to help the client get to where they need to go by redirecting back on the path that the client wanted to go. So we'll talk about that with another video. But these are the markers of success with direct communication.